Hi, I'm Kyle with Stern Pinball, and in this video we are going to go over installing the shooter lane improvement kits for the X-Men Pro, Premium, and Limited Edition pinball machines. For this installation, we need some basic hand tools. We need a number 2 Phillips screwdriver, preferably one with a magnetic tip. We need a nut driver or socket, if that's all you have, a flathead screwdriver, and a set of needle nose pliers. There are 3 separate steps to install the shooter lane improvements kits for your X-Men. We're going to attack it in this order. First, we'll do the shooter spring. Second, we will do the shooter lane guide plastic. And the last step would be changing the height of the right lane ball guide. So the first step is going to be getting the pinball game ready for service. So we're going to need to remove the lockdown bar, the glass. We'll need to remove the pinballs and also be prepared to raise the playfield into the service position. If you're not familiar with these processes, we do have a Stern Tech School video titled How to Lift Your Playfield. I would suggest going to check those out to refamiliarize yourself with these steps. Before we start, we're going to want to either turn the game off or open the coin door to remove power from the playfield and cabinet. Now that the coin door is open, we have no power to the playfield. I'm going to raise the playfield to the service position. To swap out the ball shooter spring, we are going to need our needle nose pliers and flat blade screwdriver. Figure out which one works best for you. I'm going to do this with the flat blade screwdriver. Make sure that you have your red shooter spring handy. To start this process, I'm going to take my flat blade screwdriver. We can use the tip or the edge of the screwdriver here to kind of help the rubber shooter tip off the shooter rod, like that. Put that aside. And now we've got an E-clip that holds the spring to the rod. The E-clip fits into a groove on the shooter rod and it holds the spring in place. What we want to try and do is rotate the E-clip so the opening is facing the bottom of the cabinet. We're going to try to get our flat blade screwdriver in underneath and pry it up and off the rod. Bring back, and that'll help you figure out where the bottom is. What I'm going to do is put my screwdriver in one of those openings and put my thumb on top of the E-clip here. And when I do that, I'm going to pop it up like that. With your thumb on top, that will keep the E-clip from flying. And with your finger holding the spring back like this, it's going to keep it from shooting into the back of the cabinet. Now we can release tension on the spring and take the spring and washer off. We'll set the silver shooter spring aside, get the red one, put the red one on the shooter rod, and now we're going to compress it and hold it in place. We're going to get our washer, set that back on, and again, hold it all in place, and grab our E-clip. We're going to take the opening of the E-clip, put it on the machined groove here on the shooter rod, and try to press it down. If you can't press it down with your thumb, grab your screwdriver and use the flat portion of the screwdriver to press down for you and get it to click onto the shooter rod as so. Now you can release tension on the spring, grab your shooter rubber tip, put it back onto the shooter rod. The red shooter spring we installed is a heavier gauge steel wire, and that will impart more force on the pinball when you do a full strength plunge, and that'll help the ball plunge around the shooter path a lot smoother. Now that we've installed the red shooter spring, we are going to lower the playfield. We're going to want to make sure we get these rubber feet on the support bars on our lock bar receiver. To do this installation, the only tool we need is a number 2 Phillips screwdriver, preferably magnetic. The preferred and safer method to install this piece is going to be having a second person assist you. I want to reiterate one more time, it is very important that the rubber feet are on the lock bar receiver for the stability of the playfield. Joe, would you mind showing us how to raise the playfield from the front position? So just using a little bit of leverage to lean on the front of the apron will allow the playfield to come up with plenty of space to maneuver and work in this area. The reason why I mentioned a screwdriver being magnetic and being important is because if we were to try and access this screw with the playfield down in its service position, be hard to keep track of. With the playfield here in the flat position, it's a lot easier to access and save this screw. There is an extra one just in case you lose it. We are going to get our shooter lane guide plastic from our pile of parts. It might have some protective film on it, so do peel that off first. The proper way to insert our ball guide plastic is with the long flat hand portion is going to face the right side of the pinball game. There is a long U-shaped cutout here that centers and indexes this plastic around a hex post in the back right-hand side of the playfield. So before we're about to stick this in, we want to make sure that we have it lined up correctly so then we can guide it into place. We're going to insert our shooter lane plastic guide as so. We're going to get it into the ramp channel here, the vertical portion, and then guide it on in until we can get the entire thing to index around the hex post here. Once we have the shooter lane ball guide plastic in place, we want to make sure that the diverter portion of the plastic is on the side of the ball guide closer to the flipper. So as we can see now, it is resting up against the north side of the ball guide. We want to lift up the plastic and just force that to be behind as so. Then now with it in place, we have the vertical portion of the ball guide behind the ramp wall. Once we have the ball guide plastic in the proper position, we will take the screw we removed from this plastic and screw the entire assembly back down. Now that we've installed the shooter lane guide plastic, let's make sure the ball has proper clearance. We'll take one of our pinballs and with the playfield in its tilted back position, we can drop a ball and make sure it transitions smooth underneath the new plastic and to the back of the playfield. Now that we've got the shooter lane ball guide installed, we are going to raise the right side ball return guide. The first step is we're going to put the playfield back into the service position and unplug the connector for the flasher that is mounted to the ball guide. Now with the flasher unplugged, we can put the playfield back down into playing position. For our next step, we need our 11/32 nut driver, and we are going to remove the two nuts that hold this ramp to the ball guides here. Remove the washers underneath them and set these aside. Now with the washers removed, we are going to lift the wire ramp up and off the playfield. And now with the ramp removed, we are going to remove the washer that is near the right flipper here. Now we'll take our number 2 screwdriver and loosen these two screws that hold the plastic on top of the right return lane. When we loosen these screws, there will be plastic spacers that will become loose. Make sure we don't lose those. Now with all that hardware removed, we can remove this plastic assembly with the flasher underneath. So we will guide this up over the post stud and gently fish out that connector that we unplugged in our first step here, and we can set this aside. Now with that out of the way, we can take our 1/4" hollow nut driver and loosen that post stud here. Remove it from the playfield along with this black plastic spacer. Now with the ball guide loose, we can remove this from the plastic spacers that are holding it off of the playfield. Now we're going to remove the spacers. We'll start with these two black plastic spacers and we'll replace these with the ones that came in the hardware bag. The new spacers we're going to install underneath this ball guide are just a bit longer than the ones we're removing. Set those there in their recessed holes. Now we're going to remove the hex post and get the longer one from the hardware bag. The one we're installing is just a bit longer than the one we removed. Before we reassemble, take a look at the highway ramp on the right side of the game. The opto transmitter near the pop bumper has a harness. The harness should be routed to the left side of this wire ball guide, not on the right side. If you notice that your opto transmitter harness is routed on the right side of this wire ball guide, now would be the perfect time to reroute it since you're in this area. Now with the new longer spacers installed, we'll take our metal ball guide and we will take our spacer and post We will insert it as so. Let's get that lined up and started to thread back into the playfield. Now that we have the ball guide in place with the hex post, we will take our plastic assembly here and we will take the harness for the flasher and snake it through the hole here in the playfield and set it out of the way. We'll start with the longer screw and spacer here. Insert the screw through the hole in the plastic here. We'll put our spacer in place like so. We'll get the shorter screw, thread it through the plastic, grab our spacer, put it through the screw like so. Let's try to get this all in there as one piece. Put the long screw through the hole there and try to guide the back one home. And then with this loosely in place, we'll get our Phillips head screwdriver and then start tightening these screws. Take one of our remaining 3 washers and we are going to place it here on top of the hex post stud. We'll take our wire form ramp here and we'll take these 2 long wires at the entrance of the ramp, and we want these to insert into the stay here on the sheet metal ramp. So we'll enter them like so. And they'll kind of enter below the flat part of the sheet metal ramp. And once we get those in there, we are going to lay the 2 eyelets on top of the studs here. So now with the last bit of hardware, we're going to put a washer back on top of the wire form ramp stay here. And we're going to get one of our nuts and just tack it on there. Get our other washer and install it on the right side stay. Now we'll get our 11/32 inch nut driver and we'll get these nice and snug. What we want to do is make sure that the ramp puts the pinball in the danger room in the right spot, and it's not sending it too high into a rubber or too low. We want to have it flow in correctly. So let's drop it in. It's dropping in nicely every time. Kind of got it aimed right the first time. So since that looks pretty good, what we can try doing are we'll tighten them down in position. Once we have them tightened down, we'll put the ball back in. I'm gonna throw the ball in there with a little bit more force. Let's try that again. I didn't like how that fed. I don't like that. Let's try loosening the exit stay here, and we'll aim the ramp a little bit up towards the top of the playfield. We'll send the ball back down. That's a lot better. It's not striking that ball guide anymore. Before I adjusted the ramp, almost every time the ball came off of this ball guide, it came in and struck the flat rail above the flipper. Now with it aimed up a little bit higher, it's feeding just above the flipper. That's a lot better. Now that we have the ball guide aimed correctly and everything is tight, we are going to have to plug that flasher back in. So let's raise the playfield, reattach the flasher. And now with that, we have installed all 3 components of the X-Men Shooter Lane Improvement Kit. Let's put the playfield down and test it out.